Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back to the Kev Talks podcast, episode 22. I am so thankful to be joined by Kim Colegrove, who is the author of the book Mindfulness for Warriors that I both read, used the tools in, and did a podcast episode about in September of 2022. So please go check that out. Really thankful that you're on the show. Thanks for being here so much, Kim. I think I said thank you like 5 times, but appreciate it.
Well, thank you 5 times for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I mentioned, last year was a tough one for me. Had some family sickness that brought up a whole bunch of other stuff. I had a panic attack, dealt with that, at the time pretty poorly, but throughout the year expanded or rebuilt on a lot of my tools, right. Of better sleep, cutting back on alcohol, hydrating. I was exercising pretty well, and then got more into mindfulness, which we'll certainly get into here and that you've been into for a long time. But it just makes a huge difference. And we'll get into kind of how that works as well. But we also want to share, kind of your background and your history, because you have a long history of using mindfulness in general, but then also the catalyst for what, caused you to create Mindfulness for Warriors, the book. And then we'll get into the Pause First Academy. So where did you grow up and what led you down the mindfulness path?
Well, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and home of the Chiefs. Sorry, I had to stick that in there.
Nice.
And this is where I grew up. I'm like, I don't even know, third, fourth generation Kansas Cityan, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I have a long history with meditation, that's for sure. My parents had me trained in transcendental meditation in 1976 when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
So that's a technique. It's still around. It's a viable technique. It's what a lot of our research is based on, actually.
Okay.
It's not what I practice anymore, and it's not what I teach. But that definitely was the foundation that helped me create the methodologies I ended up using down the road. My parents were meditators, and I look back now and I think a lot of people would have thought that was weird that they were having a kid trained, but I'm so glad they did, because it's a tool I used my whole life. And I was kind of a closet meditator for a long time until the early 2000s, when I kind of came out of the closet, started sharing with people about it, taught a few small workshops, and then by January of 2011, I was teaching meditation and mindfulness full-time professionally.
Oh, wow.
In corporate settings primarily, but I also taught small classes and worked with private clients. So that's when I started, using meditation as a tool professionally and supporting myself doing that. And that was a huge transition, because I quit a corporate job that I loved to do that. Yeah.
What field were you in before you took on mindfulness and meditation full-time?
Oh, gosh. Well, I worked for a company. It's not in business anymore, but it was called College Coaches Network. And we helped high school athletes get college scholarships. And I came from a big sports family. My grandfather was an NFL official for 25 years and worked 5 Super Bowls. My dad played 3 sports in college and played college football. My brother played 3 sports in college and played college football at University of Kansas. Okay. And so I came from that big sports family. And when I started working for this organization, I loved it. And I already kind of understood the recruiting process.
Okay.
So I developed and ran the customer service department, though that's really my gift. My strength in life is kind of customer service facing. That's what I do best, I think.
There you go. Cool. Yeah. And you can read the experience in the book Mindfulness for Warriors. You can tell even when you speak to someone or read kind of their words that you had that background, kind of very knowledgeable, all that great information. What we also read, unfortunately, is the story about your husband David, right, which was a catalyst for the book and getting this out to more first responders and warriors. Can you just touch on what happened and that process of you realizing, could this have made a difference? How do I get this out there to other first responders?
Sure. Yeah. So I was teaching mindfulness professionally in corporate settings, and I've been doing that for about 6 or 7 years. And in September of 2014, my husband, David, retired from a 30-year law enforcement career. He was a police officer for 8 years, and then he was a federal agent for the last 22 years of his career. So he left the house every day with a badge and a gun, but his heart was really in business. And he had spent the last 2 years of his professional life building and working on and creating a new company with a business partner. So
Oh, wow.
he appeared ready to retire. He was excited to step into the business world because he had a master's degree in business management. So he was excited to make that transition, but also terrified at the same time. All he knew was law enforcement. And so he retired in September, and then unbelievably and unfortunately, less than 3 months after he retired, David took his own life. And that was the beginning of what changed the trajectory of my life professionally, because it really made me think about the level of stress and trauma that he was living with, that he carried, that went unprocessed. And what I realized maybe, several months after he died was in his mind, he was going to retire, and that kind of would all go away, wouldn't be in that world anymore. And then he would be okay because he had plans, he had things lined up. But I don't think he ever really took care of all that was piled up inside of him. And that led me to think about I started with law enforcement, thinking about, gosh, what cops see and hear and do and endure and what they carry. And they don't really, I didn't know all of his stories, and some of his stories he would talk about very rarely, because he didn't want to, put that on me or other people. And anyway, thinking about that led me to think about all first responders. And I realized, my gosh, these people are carrying such a heavy load, and there is no way for them to offload it, because I knew part of what hindered my husband was he was never going to get the level of help that would have made a difference for him, because he was always terrified that his employer would deem him unfit to do his job. So what are you going to do? Hold it in. So that's why I then eventually, a couple of years later, just a few months after David died, I started thinking, cops need to learn how to meditate. They need to know how to meditate. They need to be learning it in the academy. I got all gung-ho about that. But turned out that getting any police agency to allow me to teach their employees to meditate was a little bit of an uphill battle.
I would imagine, yeah.
It took me some time, but I did meet finally in 2017. I met a police commander who said yes, and I started teaching meditation and mindfulness to law enforcement, and then opened it up to all first responders, social workers, all these surrounding professions. And that led me to write the book where I tell the story about David. I interviewed some veterans and first responders who share how they struggled, and what tools they found that helped them. And they all did say meditation or mindfulness, or they wouldn't have made the book, quite frankly, because that's what I was talking about.
How that worked out, yeah.
But they listed a lot of other helpful tools. And I think that's been really important and helpful for first responders, because they're reading from their peers about tools that helped them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we touched on it of, it's the book educated person that's never been in the situation that wants to talk to you about the situation and how you should deal with it. It doesn't register the same. And that doesn't mean that the tools might not work, but if folks haven't been there, and for my exposure, thanks for expanding it, is really firing a mess. I have some of my best friends are cops, career cops. Some are getting ready to retire. I shared, what you shared the other day, prepping for retirement, which we'll get into with some of the pause first, courses and stuff. But also wanted to touch on it because for me last year, after I had a tough time dealing with tons of stress, I was like, I got to find solutions. And I just was like ravenous for those, because I didn't want to deal with it. Did you find when, a few months later, you realized, hey, I have to get this in front of more cops? Like, did you have that trying to find a solution that was kind of part of a coping mechanism for you as well?
Oh my gosh. Having the skills and tools that I developed over years around meditation and mindfulness, and learning from other teachers and taking courses and going on retreats and things that I had done for years, 100% saved what could have been a devastating event for me.
Yeah.
I can understand why people struggle to get out of bed, why they shuffle around their house for months and don't know what to do with themselves. If I wouldn't have had the skills and tools that I had developed, I could have really shut down, because, David was retiring. He was starting a company he was really excited about. And I was building my company. So we were going to both be self-employed. and we had plans. I mean, we were shopping for RVs, we had our house, our grandkids were going to come to, and swim in our pool and
Right.
have sleepovers, we had plans, and that all got wiped out. And I can see that is ruining a life.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I used a lot of the tools that are mentioned in the book, and the mindfulness and the meditation, and having developed the ability to bring myself into the present moment, huge. And that self-regulation piece, because of course your emotions want to continually pull you back to the good times, to the previous times, to what could I have done differently, I didn't do enough, to the day the incident happened, right? And you could get stuck there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned and touched on, and I have kind of honestly a cheat sheet that we talked about. So using I talked about these foundational 5 things, and the foundational 5 is a concept. So for me, between project management, incident management, if you can get the leader's intent, make some objectives, make like an org structure, get resources, and communicate, you can solve pretty much any problem. And that's like taken from all the book stuff, but it's like, what has worked when we go somewhere to help after a missing person or a tornado, or plan a vice president, all these, events, which is great. And tease those out. And so when I did the previous episode of the solar one, I said, these are the 5 things that to me were most impactful, and I think would be helpful for listeners. And I wanted to talk about those a bit more. And one you already touched on, which was a great, I was sitting there like, oh, that's the segue. But the invisible wounds, right? So all the things that we keep stuffed into that attic in the back of our head, and either, like you mentioned, are afraid, both one, to probably show quote weakness, because it's not weakness, right? But then also because employers in previous years, and probably still some now, but in previous years, haven't really supported that as much. Like, hey, they're pretty unsteady, not dealing with it, as opposed to let's get you the help you need. What are some of the, or some of those, invisible wounds in dealing with it? Because you also mentioned not dealing with it, which, as we both know, some folks deal with it in a horrible way, right? With anger and withdrawal and rage and alcohol and drugs and all these other things. What can some folks kind of look at for, and this touches on the other one of kind of predictors of suicide, but those invisible wounds in hindsight, are there things now that you see that you either teach, and you mentioned in the book or through Pause First, like, hey, if you're kind of starting to see these, whether it's retirement or someone that's 1 year in or something, those invisible wounds where you can they're not so invisible, if for folks, are there some tools that folks can use to spot those?
To spot that in other people, for sure. I hear stories all the time about people being at work and realizing, she's just a little off, like something's not quite right, or somebody's personality changes, like he's really withdrawn. He used to be like jokester, and he's really withdrawn. So I think if somebody's demeanor or personality noticeably changes, if you notice a lot of risky behavior, that's a huge indicator. They're drinking more. When you're with them, or when you run into them when they're drinking, they seem like they are just wasted. That could be that they're also using drugs, with the and other risky behavior. I mean, I've talked to so many first responders who are kind of reformed risky behavior people who just wanted to drive motorcycles fast all the time and just do all kinds of crazy stuff. So there's a whole, long list of suicide indicators. But I think if you detect that something is really off or different about a person, just engaging them in a conversation, and that's what people are afraid to do. But you can just say, hey, are you doing okay? Like, you seem a little off. I'm here for you, buddy, if you ever need to talk, something like that, just to open a window, because sometimes people just simply don't have anybody to talk to.
That's a good point, right? Yeah, and it's hard. It's actually not hard, but it's hard some way, however that fits, to reach out to some folks, right? Even if it's someone you work with all the time, and it's that maybe afraid to cross that barrier, because do they want to hear the answer for real? You know what I mean? So if it's your peer,
that's
it's
such
probably
a good
little
point.
easier, though, right?
That's such a good point, because we do kind of have that thing sometimes where we're like, I don't really want to get involved, or it's just above my pay grade. Like, what if they do say something's wrong? I don't know what to do with that. and heaven forbid someone tell you they're having suicidal ideation, thoughts of suicide, or
Right.
feel like, something like that, because you can't walk away from that conversation. You can't
Right.
be like, well, hey, tomorrow's a new day. I mean, so that's a good point. It's sometimes hard to ask. And this is why really what needs to happen. I mean, we can speculate all the, what are good ways to approach this, but what needs to happen is an overall culture change across all of these professions. And it needs
Right.
to be a top-down endeavor, and real and true mental and emotional wellness and health and well-being needs to be important. And it has to start with the leadership, and the leadership has to support it and model it. Support it
Great
and
point.
model it. It's one thing to be a boss and bring in some training, or
Right.
get a clinician for your agency, or whatever it is. It's one thing to support it. It's a completely different level to model it for people, talk openly about it, and make it okay. And those are the kind of people that I've ended up, luckily and accidentally over the years, gathering around me. A couple of former command level people,
Right.
and then just others that I've met on my path. These are the true leaders, in my opinion, the ones who are brave enough, courageous enough to be vulnerable and be honest
Right.
about their struggles, like to share with their people at work, and and like, hey, I struggle, to be open and honest about maybe going to therapy. And so start to normalize that. That's what needs to happen. The rest of us that are kind of on the leading edge of wellness, we can tiptoe around all this and try and figure out like what's the best way to secretly do it. But that isn't, I mean, people are dying. Right? People are dying every day at their own hands.
Right.
And first responders' life expectancy is lower than that of the general population because of health problems and alcoholism and all kinds of things. We are sacrificing human beings to these jobs, and that's not okay. So the true leaders, the actual leaders, the bosses, and then those not the actual leaders, but the leaders within the organization. And
Right.
I know you know these, and I know you've worked with them, and you may be one, but they're leaders in a different way that are willing to step up, step forward, be honest, and pave the way for this to be okay. It just needs to be okay. The fact that, and this is what happened with my husband for sure. He held in and carried this stuff for so many years because he was so terrified that anybody would think there was anything wrong with him. He needed to hold up, to keep up the facade.
Right.
And he didn't live to be 52. And so that's not worth it.
Right.
It's not worth it to keep up the facade. It's not worth it.
Right. Yeah. I totally know what you mean. And you see it on, critical incidents or something, and, kind of the white wave shows up, right? The white shirts with the collar brass, and the leaders you mentioned are the leaders that have, who knows what rank they are, but they're the ones people look to, like on field decisions or in the precinct or the firehouse decisions. Yeah, exactly. And those folks are not, they may on the outside be stoic and, look like, oh, they've got it squared away, but they could be the worse off. Right. And just not showing it. And to your point, to let folks, it's not a break, right? But to let them kind of release the pressure valve and say, yeah, you know what, I am going to go talk to somebody, and learn that balance of, someone may start the discussion with their crewmate or, someone, their colleague, and then educating the colleagues to know, hey, if you hear these kind of things, it's all right to let other people know, because to the point, you're like morally obligated kind of now, right? Because it's better to say something than not say something, and someone does take their life, and then you're like, oh my God, why didn't I say something? Right. And
the ripple effects of guilt around that's not worth it either.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. This just has to change. My dream is that in a decade or so, therapy and time off for the invisible wounds and all that will be the norm, will be the rule and not the exception. So, you're standing around shooting the what with buddies at work, and someone goes, oh yeah, when I get off my shift today, I've got therapy. And someone else goes, you go to therapy? And everyone else in the room goes, you don't? That's weird, dude. You got to get in therapy. Like, you got to, if you're going to do this job, you got to be in therapy, right? I want that
shift
to
it the other way.
The norm. That's the shift I want to see. Like, before I die, I want to be able to know that that's what's happening across all these professions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much help. I was going to say therapy, but there's obviously therapy and therapy, but it's so helpful. At times it's painful talking about it, but it's also a release, right? To talk to somebody. Um, and it does make a difference when you do get trained professionals that are either from that field or very much understand that field.
That's
And
the
you can
key.
talk about it. Yeah.
That's the key, that when we talk about therapy, and that therapy is
Hmm.
not the only way you can heal and get
Right.
better. And a lot of people are very resistant to it.
Yeah.
But the key is you have to find a culturally competent
Mm.
therapist that specializes in trauma.
Right.
You can't just go to, just anybody. So a lot of people resist finding a therapist because of the finding a therapist part, which I
Yeah.
understand, but it's worth it.
I've had similar discussions, and that's the thing. It's like any product, frankly. You're not every product's the same, and by that I mean the quality of the therapy, the person giving you the tools, and you'll feel it. And it's probably a funky comparison, but like you find a good. For me, I get my hair cut with clippers, so I can go to a bar pretty much anywhere, like sports clips, whatever. But when you get that one that just cut just right, you're like, okay, I'm going there again, and it clicks, right? Versus, oh, they really messed it up, or something like that. And the same thing happens with therapists. And I haven't gone to a lot of different therapists, but there's a different, just like any other skill set. And to that point, in your dream, it'd be great if the institutions had already kind of filtered that out. And sure, there could still be some variability, but those leaders, both mid-level, low-level, high-level, whomever, can help vet those folks.
Yeah, so
In that.
where I live, we have in the greater Kansas City area, I work with another organization called the Battle Within.
Oh,
And we do a 5-day retreat in nature for warriors, veterans, and
oh,
first
great.
responders. And they come and learn the tools they need to use, they can use, to get themselves on a healing path.
Hmm.
And that organization has worked with some other local anyway. Let me just say, if anyone's curious about any of this later, you can always email me or call me or
Yeah,
something, and I can give you the information. But they have a very robust, well vetted network of therapists
nice.
just for veterans and first responders. Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
that's through the state of Missouri. I live in the greater Kansas City area, but just like barely over on the Kansas side. Kansas City's a border city.
Gotcha. Yep.
But yeah, they've done that, and it's a really robust, culturally competent list, and that's what every agency and organization and area that needs to be focusing on for this demographic. And I think that a couple of the people I interviewed in Mindfulness for Warriors touched on the importance of finding the right therapist. So it's not just that they're
Right.
culturally competent, it's that you vibe with them, that you connect with them, because not all personalities vibe with each other. So if
Right.
you have 2 or 3 sessions and you're like, oh, we're just not clicking, then you have to go find someone new, because you want them to be trauma informed, trauma sensitive, culturally competent, but also you want to be able to be really comfortable and click with that person, so you can open up and get where you want to go with the therapy.
Yep, that makes sense. And again, you touched on the ripple effect. Well, the ripple effect of trauma is one thing, but there's also a ripple effect of suicide, right? And that was seen after your husband's suicide, and then your nephew, was it? Or
Yeah, 7 months later, 7 months after my husband died. So um my husband and my nephew were extremely close.
Mhm.
My nephew has 2 brothers, but he hung out with my husband a lot. My husband taught him how to fish, taught him how to use tools, taught him how to, look under the hood of a car, things like
Mhm.
that. And they were just buddies always. My husband would always, I remember him saying so many times, he would hold his hand down and he would say, I remember when Nico was just this tall.
Hmm.
There was just something about that kid. Um, and and yeah, then 7 months after my husband died, my nephew Nico took his own life using the same type of gun. I mean, it was just
Wow.
horrible, just
Yeah.
just just really horrible. And I didn't know that there was something called suicide contagion. I
Contagion.
actually heard about it from my hairstylist after my nephew died. She said, "Did you
Oh,
know this is a thing?" And then she explained to me there was a family in the city she was from that had, like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 different generations, like grandfather, fathers, like that had all
oh,
died by
geez.
suicide. And so that I looked into it, I read about it, and I thought, I would have not known about this. And I was criticized by one veteran for bringing that up in the book that said, I'm just trying to guilt trip people. And it's really hurtful to me for anyone to think that I would mean any harm with this book. But I think that was some of his own stuff, maybe, coming in. Here's what I know. When someone decides to take their life, I know one person who attempted and didn't succeed. And I've read books, heard podcasts, and other stories of other people who attempted and didn't succeed. And when they get to that point, I've heard a lot of people call people who choose suicide, I've heard people call them cowards. But the reality is, when they get to that point, they literally feel like everyone will be better off without them. They're so miserable with themselves, and it's something I don't even think we can really truly understand if we aren't there. Right. They're so miserable that they don't want to exist anymore. That alone breaks my heart, for anyone to be in so much pain that they think the only relief is to not exist anymore. Right. But they also feel like they've been a burden, like they're not doing well in life. They're a burden to their loved ones, or whatever's going on in their life. And they literally feel like everyone will just be better off without me. And if somebody were to say, well, what about your kids, or what about your parents? Well, they'll get over it. Everyone gets over a death. And, they really believe that the world will be better off without them. And I just want to say to anybody and everybody who's there, so many people attempt and aren't successful and are always so glad they're alive, when they survive. Right. And there's always something else. There's always something else. Then this is really personal, and I don't ever talk about this, but I believe if my husband hadn't been so concerned about what people would think if they knew anything was wrong with him, I think if he would have stepped fully into help that was available, we did put him on the mental health track. This all happened so fast after he retired. But his anxiety was debilitating. And I mean, just so he did get some treatment, and they put him on what I feel like was a very dangerous cocktail of medications. And when something wasn't working, or he would report it wasn't working, they would just add another one. And it was I finally had to take control of those medications, because I realized he was not taking them right. Right. So I had to completely take control of him. And I think he was so not himself on that cocktail of medications. Right. It still makes me actually really mad. I get really angry when I talk about this. Yeah. I don't think he would have done what he did if he wouldn't have been on all those medications. And he was sneaking alcohol on the side. I found out after he died. And I'm saying this to you because of people who might be listening and might be kind of where David was, like in this struggle. When I work with people at the Battle Within, I teach the meditation and mindfulness there. And a lot of those people are really, this is kind of like a last ditch. They really need a new level of help. Right. And they're hurting so much. And I think sometimes all the psychiatric meds can be really dangerous. And I'm not telling anyone don't take the meds, because for crying out loud, you have to sleep. Right. I've talked to people who didn't sleep for 5-6 days on end, and you have to sleep. Right. So if you need the meds, but I would say to anybody who's taking psychiatric meds for anxiety, for depression, for sleep, whatever it is, what else are you doing? And are you taking them right? And are you monitoring them? And are you regularly going to your psychiatrist, to your whatever it is? And if a pill bottle says not to consume alcohol when you're taking it, don't consume the damn alcohol. Right. Because it's affecting your brain. So I don't feel like David would have gotten in the condition that he was in to choose taking his own life if he wouldn't have been so consumed with the anxiety and everything that I think rushed up at retirement that he had held down for so many years. And then the that crazy cocktail of drugs that the doctor just kept piling on more and more. So that's for listen, this is above my pay grade, and I probably shouldn't talk about it, but I do kind of like to caution people a little bit. Take them,
Yeah.
take
I
them
mean,
right.
and it's an immediate response, right? Of, oh, you're having these, here's these pills. Right. And
Yes.
for some folks, they take them right and they work. And for other folks, they make you feel awful and not like you're in reality. And that's from personal experience. And but to the point, then it's like, okay, well, it can't take any of this stuff. But it's also not a one-stop shop, right? These don't magically fix
No.
things. And user experience varies, right? There's some folks I know that have taken them for a long time and they are good to go. No
Yeah.
side effects, nothing. And other folks, it's an awful, awful
So
thing.
if yes, and if you're
Yeah.
someone who's not having the good experience, you don't feel right, you don't feel good, that you just can't let it go. That's you
Right.
just gonna have to get to know your provider really well
Yes.
and go back and talk and be honest because they can adjust. You just have to get someone
Yep.
that will pay attention to you.
Yeah.
I felt like my husband's psychiatrist was just like, I've got like 3 minutes. I'm just gonna get, here, just add this, add this, add this. I mean, that's kind of what it felt like. But
Yeah.
yeah, you have to be really invested in yourself and do it right and make sure. Just keep going back, keep talking to your doctor and until you can get that right. And I still would ask you, what else are you doing? How are you
Right.
eating? Are you getting fresh air? Are you exercising? Are you taking care of your relationships? Like all the things, right? All the other things that we need
Yep.
to be doing too for self-care.
Which is funny. I just turned the page on my notes, which I already knew what was on the other page, but that's another great segue is so medication they make a difference, but there's so much more to do, and that a ton of that is in your book, which is great. So you hear about your story, David's story, stories from other first responders of all kinds, veterans as well, and then okay, here's some tools that you can use, you should combine this whatever the mix is. And I think that's part of it too. So you not only with your doctor, with your therapist, with whomever, medical professional, you have to be your own advocate or have someone with you that can. And that can be hard for folks, if you're single or whatever. Right. And so, but you have to do that. You also have to be your own advocate to take action to do these other things. And to your point, you haven't slept well in 3 or 4 days. You're still the only person that can get you up out of bed and do it. And some days that is awful, right? It's super hard to do, but you can do it. And just to share on that. So for folks that, if you feel like that, and every time, whether it's Twitter, anywhere, someone's like, what's a book you've read? What's a quote? It's always Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl. And it's always, if you have your why, you can figure out your how. And he was quoting, Nietzsche on that, but it's amazing. And this was a guy, right, that was taken, his family killed during the Holocaust. Like, you want to talk about worst possible, and not to do as my friend that was a corpsman with me, that, and we've had some back and forth discussions, similar, things. We're not going to do the trauma Olympics on whose is worse, right? Experience, which people can get into. But that perspective is amazing. And if you want to look at an example of someone that was in the worst possible situation probably a human could be, it was that guy. And even, when you read through that book, one, it's really well written, he's a smart guy. But when you get that perspective of, okay, today is awful. I didn't sleep. I'm exhausted. I don't want to eat. I'm anxious, but realize, I have a why, whether it's, and sometimes that's hard to find, to the point, like we mentioned earlier, some folks, their why is gone seemingly. And so, for that, I don't have an answer, but I think using a lot of these tools ahead of time to build up your resilience or pull back some of the anxiety can make a difference. And so you mentioned when you started, you were in transcendental meditation. Throughout the years, I'm sure you learned a bunch of different techniques. And, in the book you mentioned, and it goes in a lot more detail, but, a few, as simple as a few moments or minutes of just like uninterrupted quiet
Yeah.
is like a great place to start.
Yeah. What I specialize in is teaching introductory meditation. That's kind of my jam,
Nice.
is bridging that gap between people who think it's weirdo, hippy dippy, airy fairy, whatever. And, and then the people on the far side that, meditate 2 hours a day and everything, but to bridge that gap.
Right.
And I teach it to people in a very mainstream, straightforward, plain language way. And so every class I teach, every talk I give, everybody, that asks me about it, I always talk about the evidence-based benefits and that's, support meditation. And then I think I just lost my train of thought.
Evidence-based meditation. I mean, in everything, and to your point. So I did like a gold rush, a grab. I was like, I need to find solutions. I need to do something, someone to talk to, these things to help me feel better to sleep. Right. I got into all the sleep hygiene, which my sleep hygiene was awful, which probably most
No.
people's that have problems
Yeah.
are. And so I dug into a lot of that too. And it was, your book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, like all these
Really
different
good
either
one.
trauma or, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. But in all of them and other things I read, yoga, meditation, walking in nature, like a lot of the similar stuff, but the science behind meditation and mindfulness, and those get kind of used interchangeably. Can you kind of tease the difference of those? Like, is mindfulness, does meditation fall under as a tool that's part of overall mindfulness, or how do those go together? Because I see them together a lot in different sources.
Yeah, and people get very confused. I talk to more newbies, like beginners, than anybody else. So here's the way I view them. This is the way I use them, and this is the way that I teach them to people.
Okay.
I think of meditation as a daily exercise or a daily practice, and
Gotcha.
then mindfulness is kind of a more of a way of being, or like a state of being, more present in each moment and more present in your life. And what I mean by that is not always mentally distracted,
Right.
focusing on things from the past, which we love to do as humans. We love to
Yeah.
ruminate about the past, go over and over things, not
Yep.
projecting ourselves always into the future, worrying and anxiety and fears and precautionary thinking and all that. But developing the ability to bring yourself into the present moment, be in the present moment, because there's relief available in the present moment. And so I usually will say meditation is to mindfulness as exercise is to fitness. So if you want to improve your overall physical fitness, you have to exercise, and
Right.
not once.
Yeah.
You exercise daily or regularly,
Right.
and then that's going to increase your physical fitness. So to me, meditation is that daily exercise or practice, and
Gotcha.
it just sort of invites more mindful awareness and mindful presence into your days. Mindfulness then will kind of weave itself into the tapestry of your days.
Right.
And you'll train yourself then to pause, to get into the present moment, to
Mhm.
take a breath, to respond instead of being reactive and things like that. And and a minute ago, when I lost my train of thought, I remember what I was going to say.
Good.
You said something about, and I was tying it into meditation, that these tools we're talking about, these skills
Mhm.
and tools, and you said something about when people are in really bad shape, when they have that really bad day,
Right.
and like, I don't want to get out of bed today, I'm so full of anxiety, I can't eat, like everything feels bad. That's probably not the day to try and force yourself to meditate.
Right.
But if you will meditate, take a walk, do a 2-minute breathing exercise, do a 1-minute mindful exercise, anything,
Right.
find something in this list. It doesn't have to be even what we're talking about. There are many other tools and skills, but do them on the days when you do feel better. You have to do them as a habit
Right.
when you are feeling better. And then when those bad days hit, first of all, you'll notice that the bad days aren't so frequent and not so intense if you start integrating self-care tools. And then if you apply the self-care tools, whatever
Right.
you choose, on the days when you feel better, then you're going to feel really good about yourself because you won't be as resistant. Right. So there's just,
Yeah.
it's a little heavy lifting in the beginning, especially if you're in a pretty well-worn path of misery.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah. And the cumulative effect, it's not an instant acting pill to put you to sleep. Right. It's a cumulative effect of how you retrain, literally rewire your brain to work better, different. I don't know, what the right word there is, but yeah, and it has to be over and over time. I just caught up with a good buddy of mine that's a prior captain, I was emergency manager, and same thing. We talked about. I use the app Headspace all the time. No sponsorship, but if you're listening, I'll talk about you all the time.
Hey.
Yeah, but it's good, right? And it's anywhere from 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to your point. I think I don't know the ones I use go up to half an hour, which I haven't gone that long yet either. But as much as that much a day, every day, or on the good days, to your point, when you're starting, like do the short one, right? And really, it's getting you to take those breaths, sit there, do a body scan, and then you're done, right? And it just gets longer with different intervals, that kind of way. I'm sure there's other different ways too, but to that, when you're doing meditation, breathing and breath work, right? And as you say, that the breath is the body's natural stress reliever, right? It re-regulates our system, which is amazing. When you were first learning and then kind of evolved your meditation practices, was breath work just a huge part of that?
I just remember being taught that the breath carries you into the meditation, and that the breathing was really so kind of finding your center, engaging with your breathing,
Mhm.
paying attention to your breathing, slowing it down, deepening it, really breathing. I remember that all being part of, kind of initiating the meditation, carrying you into the meditation. And now I mean, that was 46 years ago that I
Wow.
had that first training, that initial
Yeah.
training. And now there's so much research on just breathing
Right.
exercises. So I and my team, we really emphasize breathing exercises, because that can kind of be like the gateway drug to
Mhm.
meditation or in mindfulness eventually. And it's something that people aren't as resistant to.
Right.
And then the only problem is remembering to do it. You have to become aware, and this in and of itself is a mindful exercise or a mindful awareness. You have to begin to become aware when you are dysregulated. So when you're freaking out, and when all the alarms are going off, whatever happens to you, the breathing gets labored or choppy, your shoulders get real tight, you clench your teeth, your gut feels bad, like whatever it is that happens, you have to start to recognize that
Mhm.
and stop just living with it. Because some people
Oh,
they're
right.
like a fish in water, right? Because their stress response kicks in so regularly, and they're so used to living in stress and chaos that they're just in it.
Right.
Like they don't even realize how much they live in it. But that wears down your biological systems over time. So if you don't want to continue, you're marinating in stress hormones. So
Right.
you don't want to continue to do that. And any little practice or any little tool, 1 minute tool that you can do to help kind of reset that. And that's the thing that I share with people, especially who are new to this or a little bit skeptical. I have ever so many tricks, tips, and tools to teach people how to meditate at
Right.
all kinds of different approaches, because we're all different. We
Sure.
all have different learning styles and all that. And then, people get really hung up on, I can't possibly sit still for 15 minutes. No way. So I'm like, okay, how about you start with 1 minute and let's do something really simple. And then you just do 1 minute a day until you hit a day. I don't care if it's in 6 months that you say, I think I can add a minute now. Now do 2 minutes. Just make it doable. In
Right.
fact, I have a totally free 21-day meditation course on the
Nice.
academy. It's not open right now. You can sign up for it, but I open it every so often. And so I'll give you that information. And
Absolutely.
again, people can
Link
reach
to
out
it.
to me. But that's a good way. And when I tell you it's free, I mean it's free. It's not like free and then I you know email you four
Spam
times
your
a day
email.
to
Yeah.
buy something from me, and it's free, because it really is my way of just dip your toe in the pool. Just try some different things. It's 21 days of trying some different approaches. And I just have very, very short little lessons, 5-minute lessons.
Nice.
And so that's a good way to experiment with it. I mean, if I can just say one thing to
Please.
people listening about meditation and mindfulness, if you're rolling your eyes or you're skeptical or you think it's weird or hippy dippy BS or whatever, if you could just set those preconceptions aside for a minute
Right.
and go take a look at the evidence-based benefits, pick up a book. And because it is a way, these are really powerful tools we can use to use. Earlier you said rewire your brain. We can
Right.
actually rewire our
Yeah.
brain. We
Legit. Yeah.
can cool off our own stress response. We can, they're empowering
Mhm.
practices.
They are. Yeah. And I think one of the best benefits I got was in sleep. So I did the whole, and it's, not a cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia podcast, but I did one of those. So go listen to Got Sleep. But that makes a difference. And really the sleep hygiene, right? Like don't look at your screen late, turn the lights down, kind of a whole routine. But with that, and I usually do it earlier in the day, and I did some sleep meditation things too. But the cumulative effect of being able to calm myself down, if I happen to wake up going, well, like that, you're like, oh, okay. And then breathing, let me do like box breathing, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And you just control yourself back out pretty
Yes.
well, pretty easily. And it's not, all the time, but it's a lot of the time when you are into it. And because plus you also, to the point of, you feel when you're not in fight or flight all the time. Right. And I'm not on call. I don't do that work anymore. So I don't have an on shift, off shift where my mindset has to change as much anymore. If anything, it's, do I have chores now, or do I have a work call, something like that, working at home. But that's a real tangible, to me, benefit, and a lot of other things overall, because I'm sure during the day. But when you go to sleep, if you're stressed or anything, if you do this practice, you can calm yourself down a lot more, so you can sleep better. Then, of course, that cycle of sleeping better then helps all the other stuff, and it's this whole connected, circle, that's
All
and all the other
connected.
stuff. Yeah.
Yes, it's all connected. Mental health, emotional health is health.
Yeah.
Health, sleep, what you eat, fresh air, you breathing properly. It's all connected. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. I mean, if one breathing technique you don't like it doesn't feel good, it doesn't really calm you down, then there's 30 more you can go try. And
Um,
what it boils down to, Kevin, is self-regulation.
right.
Self-regulation. The power to regulate yourself when you feel out of control or when you feel overwhelmed or stressed. I mean, that's like a superpower.
That is.
And
Yeah.
I really don't know a path to self regulation other than breathing, meditation, mindful practices, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's regulation, not masking, right, with something else. But to your point,
Yeah.
so a lot of these tools are in there to get started in mindfulness for warriors in the book. However, there's also a whole academy, right, that you mentioned. You put out sources, right? So pause first.
Pause First
One,
Academy. Yeah.
Pause
Pause
First
First
Academy. Yeah.
Academy. Mm-hmm.
What's in the name? How'd you get to that? And then let's get into a lot of the stuff you provide, which is awesome. Not just, online like this, but for other academies and departments around the country. So how did you come to Pause First Academy? How did that come about?
Okay. Super quick Reader's Digest. I was teaching mindfulness and meditation in corporate settings for several years before my husband died. So I kind of understood about presenting and talking and PowerPoint and things like that. And so the first thing I did was put together a half-day training called an Introduction to Meditation and Mindfulness. And I started teaching that to first responders. And then I
Nice.
wrote the book. And then I was asked to do a few keynote speeches around the book. And as I traveled around and taught that, I met a lot of first responders. And one by one, I met people that I just clicked with, that I really liked. And so when I decided, I think this is really something that needs to happen. I think this training just for first responders, and completely stopped doing corporate jobs, turned my full attention to first responders. So one by one, I asked these people if they wanted to come and work with me somehow, do training together. They were all first responders or veterans. They all had an interest in wellness and resilience building, and they all had experience teaching in their own professions already.
Nice.
And so now I have a team. My core team is 6 of us. They all have backgrounds as veterans and first responders. And we do in-person trainings, like in-service training,
Sure.
keynote. We do conferences and things like that. But we have the online platform, Pause
Nice.
First Academy, and we all do online training there too. And we have, yes, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, but you're learning yoga from a retired detective. And you're learning
Great.
meditation from a retired police officer who now teaches meditation and mindfulness in law enforcement. He also is a chaplain now, and he also
Oh,
works
wow.
with incarcerated people, right? So these are all people who have done similar jobs. They're your peers. And we have that, but we have also just, there's an anger management, conflict
Okay.
resolution. There's there's one on emotional intelligence. There's a whole, I think we have 46 published courses now. And most of our
Wow.
members, it's a subscription, it's a membership. Most of our members are organizations who
Nice.
purchase the subscription and give the memberships to their employees for free. So like Missouri Department of Corrections is our biggest
Oh,
client.
cool.
I think they have like around 8,000 employees. So, and they just renewed with us for their 3rd year. And
That's great.
Yeah, so I'm super proud of what we're doing. I love my team so much. I feel really happy to be surrounded by such smart, heart-centered people. And I mean, this is just what we're doing now. We're just
That's great.
trying to help people get out of stress response 24/7.
That's a noble cause, a challenging one, I'm sure, especially when their job is stress responses, and
All
you
day,
know,
every day.
you
Yeah.
mentioned correction. So I talked to a good buddy of mine about substance abuse, right, in law enforcement. His story, he had struggles with it too, and he mentioned corrections. And part of the stats I kind of use, I like to start with a quote or stats or something like that. And but a big part of it was corrections, right? And the perspective he gave me, because he was police, now he's with sheriffs. So, he had the patrol perspective, and now he's got like that jail perspective that I never thought about was, as a police officer, I can go to a call and then I leave that call and then I can go get lunch with my buddy. These guys are in jails and prisons all day long, right? So
Yeah.
it's not the greatest environment, as you can imagine, and so that constant is just a whole nother level. In person, kind of similar to dispatchers, right? They're getting call after call after call after call, and hopefully they give them a break. And I have an episode coming up soon, which is great, from someone that is doing therapy and grants and stuff for the 911 dispatchers, right? Because they're it's
Yay.
not, as I know, as I've talked about it, they don't have kind of the sexy woo woo lights and sirens kind of thing. But as we all know, they get the first call, they hear it, they're on the line. It's probably harder because they can't put their hands on somebody and make a direct difference. You know what I mean? Even though if they make a giant difference in talking to somebody and but that perspective and corrections, and then just being exposed constantly, gave me a new perspective for them, which I didn't think about,
Yeah.
right? Because the environment they're
Yeah.
in is nonstop.
I've learned a ton from doing this work. I have a dispatcher in my book. I don't know if you remember reading her story, but oh my gosh. And I really learned a lot from her. And she's a dispatch supervisor, and I went to do a ride along.
Oh,
And
wow.
she was, kind of my guide that day. And I was going to do a whole shift. And I think I lasted 30 minutes because I happened to be there when a real horrible call came in. Horrible,
Yeah.
horrible. And that led me to this whole, new arena of discovery about what dispatchers actually do, what they do for us, first of all,
Right.
society, what they do for police officers,
Right.
what they do for the people who call in, and just what they are doing, for us as a society. And they've been so overlooked. So I'm glad to hear that you're
Yep.
doing an episode on that for sure. And
Yep.
I've learned a ton about corrections, and it's such hard work, and they don't get nearly enough attention,
Right.
as they should.
Yep.
And it's crucially important work. I mean, we
No
really
doubt.
need these people. Yeah. And so I'm gonna make sure that I have somebody in my next book that has worked in corrections. I have somebody in mind. I haven't asked him yet, but I'm hoping he'll participate, because yeah, it's just really, I think it's really important for all of us to understand each other.
Right.
And then,
Yep.
and then I think down the road, I would love to contribute to educating the public
Right.
about what you guys do for us. What you've done. I mean, I know you're not out on the street anymore, but you did the work.
Before,
And
sure.
people take it for granted. They don't understand just how hard it is. And so, anyway,
Yeah,
raising
that's a great
awareness.
point. In the talking about correction, just it made me think about kind of the whole cycle of, right, someone's worst day could involve all of those people at some point, right? Something
Mhm.
happens, fire and EMS are there, police are there, usually all together, depending on the call. Say someone gets arrested, they end up in jail, right? Before that, they went through 911, and then their perspective on it. And this was, not to go down a political rabbit hole, but when we talk about like police reform and all this, we need to teach crisis intervention. Well, where I was, and I know a lot of places, that's taught, right? It's taught, hey, I see you're upset, I'm here to help, like these 4 plays you do. And we were lucky we got to do that with EMS where I was, and it works. I mean, it does, but it's not new, right? It's not revolutionary, but the perspective that I think the public could benefit from, to your point, I think would be great to have more of. And it's neat to see now, and probably in the past, 2-3 years, and I forget his channel, but there's a police officer who puts citizens in situations that were based on real situations, right? As you can imagine, doesn't always go very well, right?
Wow.
It's pretty awesome because from the sideline, it's easy to see a snippet of a phone video or this or that, or something, or a call like, hey, on that call, I would have just done this, but you've never ever
Oh
been trained
gosh.
or gone in the street, right? Whether it's police, fire, mess, but this is police. And
Yeah. And it's happening in real time.
Yeah.
It's happening in real time, and it's
Yep.
fast. And
It
people want
is.
to fight you. I mean, it's like watching a football game and watching the slow motion replay, and you can't believe you didn't catch that ball. Really? Try being on the field and watching it in real time. And that's, that's
Yep.
what the firefighters and EMS and police are doing, and corrections
Mhm.
officers. That's what they're doing. Like it's real time. It's fast. It's life or death. So we
Absolutely.
don't need a bunch of armchair quarterbacks,
Right.
right? That don't do the job saying what they would have done. Or yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Absolutely.
whole other. That's
I
a whole
know.
other
I look
story.
forward to your like book series on public perception, or something, whatever it is. But yeah, is there anything? What's the best way for folks to get in touch, to get to Pause First, to get to those 40 something courses, to enroll, or interested departments? How
Yeah.
should they contact you, or Pause First, or all of the
Well,
above?
anybody can reach me directly. I'm Kim Colegrove at pausefirst.com. And pausefirst.com is the website. So that's probably the best way to go see the
Go there.
team. You can go to pausefirst.com and then click over to the online site, or, you can click around on the website and learn more about us. And I welcome anybody to reach out if there's anything we can help you with. You have any questions. I and my team, we're always accessible. We always give out our contact information whenever we travel and speak and teach to people, because sometimes people just need a lifeline, or just need some advice, or just need someone to talk to. And we've all, all of us have lost people to they've all lost people in line of duty death.
Right.
All of us have lost people to suicide, and we're not clinicians and therapists, but we are here to help. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Yep. Well, and thank you. Like I mentioned, I read the book. It was helpful for me. New stuff, reinforced stuff, and just to hear other people's stories again is also helpful, right? Like, oh, I'm not the only one. Which is interesting, because I think inherently responders know that, but it's good to hear it again, or read it again, or see that. And of course, Mindfulness for Warriors available. I'll assume Amazon, plus other places, or your library. I got mine in my
Amazon.
local library, which is
It's
great.
available on Audible if you don't really like to
Audible.
read that much. You can listen to it. But it is, I kind of pride myself on the fact that it is a very simple, easy read. And so many people have reported that to me. People who know
Yep.
me say, reading the book is exactly like talking to you. And I take that as a high praise. I like that it's kind of conversational, but it's an easy read.
Yep, it is. I agree. It was.
Oh, it's a hard read. Okay, let me wait.
It's true.
I mean, it might need a trigger warning. So parts of it are hard to read, but it's a quick read.
Yep. Yeah, the content is heavy, but yeah, that's one of my first notes was exactly that. So I'll add to the easy to read, easy to understand, but yeah, hard to hear sometimes. But sometimes we need to hear hard things, honestly, and kind of learn people's stories, your story. I'm sorry that is your story. I'm thankful that you're helping others through that. And I hope folks that are listening are as well. Please go to, pausefirstacademy.com. Is that right website?
It's pausefirst.com. Pausefirst.com. Yeah. And then the online platform is called Pause First Academy.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. So check that out. Read the book, reach out directly to Kim. And Kim, thank you so much for being on the Kev Talks podcast. And
thank you. Thank
look
you for
forward to
what you
sharing
do
this.
too. I've listened to some of your episodes. Good stuff. Thank you.
Good. Yep. Absolutely. I think, if we get this info, if we've learned from our hardships, right, or good chips, if good things, this is a great platform to put it out there in the world. And kind of, we should be kind of like, if we learn about someone that needs help, we're obliged to help if we find ways to help others, just like you are. So I'm happy to help. I appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing your next book. So you mentioned that, so I know it's kind of at the end, but you mentioned that, do you have a name or a focus for that yet?
Yeah, the next book is called Wellness Warrior Style. And it's
nice.
gonna be a little bit of a memoir. Again, I'll have some personal stuff in there, but I'm gonna do some new interviews. And then I'm really gonna cover kind of basically all of the resources and tools that the people in the first book mentioned, and what I and my team teach. It's just gonna be a book full of tools and resources, and accessible for warriors,
Nice.
and offered for warriors, meaning I know my audience. I know you're not always open to the touchy feely stuff right up front, so it doesn't have to be a wishy-washy approach. You can approach self-care like a warrior.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. Good deal. We'll look forward to that. Thanks for listening, everybody.